Dumelang, Molweni, Sanbonani, Absheng, greetings. Once again, it's a great joy for me to be able to meet with you, dear listeners, in talking about issues of African Renaissance. Basically, what we're going to be looking at is the African Renaissance and what it means, and define the values that define African society in the past, and then look at some of the current achievements that we have made in this new South Africa, in this new Africa that we are shaping, and then move forward and see if we can take some of the good things from the past and link them with where we are today. Let me just clarify something about African Renaissance. When talking about African Renaissance, we are not talking about the Zulu Renaissance. We are talking about the African Renaissance. In other words, we are talking about the rebirth of Africa, not the rebirth of the Zulu, but the rebirth of African. Let me just define a few things. I think it becomes important that I outline the purpose of the lesson. One of the objectives of this lesson is basically to deal with self-hatred that we see in our people, particularly in an African context. We are struggling with issues of self-hatred. In other words, abantu baleka patriotism. We seem to be lacking patriotism, and we're always talking down our own people, our own heroes. We have so many unsung heroes in our continent. We are very quick to talk about other nations. We are very quick with the big achievement, abanye abantu who are outside of Africa. So we will deal with that. Secondly, we will deal with the issue of self-confidence that seems to be lacking in the lives of the people of Africa right now, and see how we can restore that. We want to basically address the whole issue of the lack of self-confidence. And then thirdly, you want to reinforce equality principles. By equality principles, in other words, you should not think of yourself inferior on the basis of you being an African. And then we'll also try and put history into proper perspective, because much of what has been said about Africa and the African people has been distorted with the sole purpose of tainting our image ukuze singabi nakho ukuzethemba sibe nokuzenyeza ngalento esiyona. So those are some of the issues that we want to address. Let us go back now and just look into the definition of Africanness itself. When we say that I'm an African, actually, being an African has got nothing to do with the color of your skin. I want to emphasize that. Being an African has got nothing to do with the color of your skin. Actually, the definition of who is African today is based on three elements. One is history. Secondly, culture. Thirdly, consciousness. By this definition, it becomes very obvious that what we're describing here is a particular way of doing things. It's a particular philosophy that we're talking about. So when we talk about African, being an African, it's not the texture of your hair, it's not the color of your skin, because then if you say that people are African on the basis of color, then we would struggle to define what used to be our former capital city as African people, which is Egypt. It has been said that there is no way in which you can define the past African society without going back to Egypt. And the people of Egypt basically are neither white nor black. So it's difficult to define what an African is so long as you're looking at the issue of color. You know, I want to add that while color and geographical space have formed part of the definition, they are no longer adequate in our days, you know, and they are increasingly becoming redundant in today's non-racializing society. That although in the past, when you say African, you would refer to a particular race group, these days it's the issue of the conscience, it's the issue of allegiance. If things go wrong in Africa, do you have any place to run to? So that's what we're talking about here. That there are people about claiming we're Africans, and yet you can see Uguti, they still have other options. We are saying we're Africans because we are loyal to this country. There is no other better place than Africa. That's the essence of the message of the African Renaissance. I also want us to basically consider that when you talk about Africanness, and you know, in the South African context, many people will tend to make a mistake because we were told by Verwoerd that you are an African if you are black. I mean, if you look at the definition of what an African is, even many people who are white in this country, who are said to be white, actually pink kind of, but we call them whites in this country, actually pink, would battle to accept that they're Africans because in the past, Africanness has always been associated with corruption. It's been associated with people who are non-achievers, and many people tend to think that although they're in Africa, they still want to maintain their Indianness. Although they're in Africa, they still want to maintain their whiteness and keep emphasizing that they're white, and yet they are in the continent of Africa, and they're doing business here, and they live here, and they were born here, and yet they don't accept that they're Africans. We have serious problems so long as you have people like that. Right? So we want to talk and clearly define what Africanness is all about. So I'm emphasizing once again, it has got nothing to do with the color of the skin. As a matter of fact, there are many people who are in Africa right now who are black, who are not African. About them Africa, yet base Africa, and yet they are not Africans. Ngobucabanga kwabo is westernized. Ukwenza kwabo is westernized. The way they do things, you know, their approach to life, their approach to business is basically westernized. So you can't say that you're an African simply because because you're black. Is the issue of the conscience, the issue of the lifestyle, is the issue of a particular philosophy, the way you do things. That's what defines you as an African. Secondly, let's look into the definition of the word Renaissance. I know this is a word that's been abused very, very strongly. If you look into the word itself, Renaissance, I'm saying it's been abused because the word Renaissance, it means revival. And we know that when you talk about revival, people have got all sorts of misunderstanding. The word revival speaks, the first time it was used, spoke about the return to basic foundational principle. Revival has got to do with the reawakening. In other words, when you talk about Renaissance, we are talking about reawakening, ukuvuselela. These are things that have been lost, and you are going back to basically saying, I'm reclaiming these things. I want to see the restoration of these things. That's what you're talking about when you talk about Renaissance. In other words, you cannot tell me that you have gone through a process of being born again, so long as there is no change. If you say that you are born again, in other words, you have gone through the process of rebirth, renaissance, it means that you are not who you are when you started the process. In other words, there has to be a different person emerging out of the process of birth. So when we say that we're talking about the rebirth of Africa, the Africa that we see today must not be the Africa that we are seeing tomorrow if we're saying that South Africa or Africa is going through the process of rebirth. That's the word renaissance. It's the word that speaks of revival. It speaks of reawakening. It speaks of rebirth. It's basically going through the process and back to where you were before. Now, I want us to move further and talk about basically the values that we want to revive. What is it that we are saying as Sizwe? We are saying as Sizwe, we are saying there needs to be a return and the reclaiming of the things that have been lost. We are not talking so much about the cultural practices. As khulume ngamasiko la nokufanele abuyiswe. I'm aware that can form part of the process. However, what we are focusing more upon, we are focusing on the values that have built our society in the past. We are talking about the values. There are good things that we need to go back to the African society and learn from those things. There are things that we need to reclaim from our African heritage, not necessarily the cultural practices, because there we would tend to differ because we have, Africa is a very diverse society. We've got so many tribes, we've got so many languages. So when you talk about cultures, we've got many cultures within Africa. What we are looking at are not necessarily the cultural practices, whilst that may be part of it. What we are mainly concerned about is the rebirth in the areas of values. In other words, there are values that we do not deny ourselves because those things made our continent to be very, very strong. And I'll be talking about the whole issue of leadership. Another quality we'll look into the issue of Ubuntu. We'll talk about the issue of wisdom. We'll talk about the issue of generosity. We'll talk about the issue of civilization and creativity. Those are things that we are saying if we bring them back, we have a better chances of building a brighter Africa and fulfill the African dream. I'm passionate about the African dream, and I believe it could be achieved in this generation. I just want to take a quote from Ayi Kwai Ama. He said something very intriguing. He said, "A people losing sight of origins are dead. A people deaf to purpose are lost. Under the fertile rain, in the scorching sunshine, there is no difference. Their bodies are mere corpses, awaiting final burial. What you see here is that Ayikwai Ama is basically saying that if we forget where we are coming from, and we automatically become deaf to purpose, and once we have lost purpose and we have lost sight of our origin, basically we are lost, right? We will continue to exist, but there is no life in us if we neglect these issues of our originality and we forget the whole issue of purpose. So you see that there's a link between our originality and our purpose. In other words, if you have got a problem of a schizophrenia, what I'd call identity crisis, as a result of not knowing your origin, you will find it difficult to find your purpose because you are still finding out, who am I? You have got many people that are walking around Africa, they don't know their roots, they don't know who they are, because they behave as if they fell from the sky or something, because we have lost touch of we have lost sight of our origin. These are things that we want to restore. By going back to the past, I know some people might be critical. Why do we need to go back and look into those African values? The reason it's important for us to go back is because if we look into today's African society, it looks as if we have always had laziness. It looks as if we have always had corruption. It looks as if we have always been misdirected. It looks as if we have always been backward, and we are saying no, we have not always been backward. There are things that our forefathers did. Oh, Baba Mkul. When I talk about Baba Mkul, I'm not talking about necessarily about the recent Baba Mkul like Kushaga. I'm talking about our leaders back in Egypt. I'm talking of our leaders back like guys like Nimrod, Kush. Where have we been before that? So let me also say something that I find very interesting that happened in South Africa that distorted our history. Verwoerd stood up in Parliament one day and stood on top of the table. And when the members of the Parliament asked him, "What are you doing?" Verwoerd said, "Listen, I am standing on a kafira's head." He was standing on top of the table, and he responded by saying, "Ngimi phezu kwekhanda lekafura or lekafula." What? And then immediately after that, he said, "Listen, for the first time, I want you guys to legalize the drinking of alcohol for Amakafir. I want these kafirs to start focusing on drinking alcohol. And we're going to give them Castle Lager, we're going to give them Black Label. And in that way, they will forget about their freedom and die miserable. In other words, without attaining a better future." So this guy was so strategic. He wanted to destroy the African people. And at that stage, I was talking about particularly the black people of this country. And instead of literally killing them, he wanted to introduce a system where they will commit suicide in installments. Commit suicide by installment, bangayibulali same time. Ababulale slowly, killing them softly, and introduce alcohol. The amazing thing about, in as much as, there was Zulu beer and stuff like that, but the heart of introducing alcohol in the black township and saying, let people drink themselves to death, the whole idea was so that people will forget about the movement forward. Right. I always stop and wonder if Verwoerd, what he did, is still applicable today or not. I always wonder if his declarations and his intents are still working for him, although he's dead now. Verwoerd is dead. Hendrik Verwoerd died some years back. I look around, actually, the places that are formerly called reserved, that were reserved for whites in the past. Like I'm talking about some of the suburbs in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly where I'm currently working. I'm realizing that every time you go to the places that were reserved for the white people in the past, the billboards that you see there are billboards that are promoting the latest computer, the latest technology, the latest car, and they are promoting property, they are promoting all kinds of things. At the same time, when I go to places that are called Black Township, the first billboard that I see is actually promoting Ijuba, promoting Casalaga, promoting Black Label. Now, I wonder if Verwoerd is right or not. I'm leaving that to the listener again to decide. I'm leaving that to you to decide. Now, you see that in the township, the thing that is fiercely advertised is alcohol. When you go to the suburbs, places that were formerly set aside for the white people, you don't find so many billboards. And again, if you go to these places that were formerly reserved for black people, like the township, you get there you ask yourself a question like, okay, let's start with the suburbs. In the suburban tavern, one place and it's under, basically there are hours as to when you can go there, and there's one tavern where people are meeting, they're drinking, and there are securities, and there's age restriction. At the same time, I'm asking a question. If you go into the township, how many taverns do you have in one street, not in the whole of the township? Istrata SE1, Snama Tavern amangak. And what does this say about what Verwoerd says? I don't know. Maybe what Verwoerd said is really working. I'm not saying that. I'm leaving that to you again to decide. What is Verwoerd's prophecy still at work in South African society? I don't know whether it is. You decide on that. These are things that are continuously amazing me as I drive around, see so many billboards advertising alcohol, and yet when you see particular race groups, even when you check the channels that advertise alcohol, they normally advertise alcohol during the time that many of the black South Africans are watching a particular program. And then you see much of those programs that are advertising alcohol. And again, you ask yourself a question, is that what we are meant for? Is that what Verwoerd wanted? Are we helping Verwoerd fulfill his mission? Again, Verwoerd is dead. I wouldn't want to dare talk about that again. I want us to go further now and kind of like ignore that and focus more on the side of the values that formed African society in the past. Number one thing, if you double click on the African people in the past, I'm talking about in relation to their history, the first thing that comes out very, very clearly is leadership in the lives of South African, or of African people. In other words, African people were leaders. African people were passionate about leadership. I will ask a question. Are we still passionate about leadership? If we are not, maybe we're fallen. In other words, we are no longer where we are supposed to be. In other words, we are no longer in our position. We used to be passionate about leadership, but these days we are no longer passionate about leadership. Now, in defining all of these things, I want to introduce to you the book that I will talk about really as much of a history textbook. I would look into what some people would call the Jewish history. Well, we will use the Bible to try and find out actually where the African people are coming from, because there's a book called the Book of Genesis in the Bible, which is the Book of Origins. Immediately, many people get upset when we start touching the Bible. And I want to agree with the listeners. The reason people get upset when they touch the Bible is because the Bible was used in taking the land Yabantu Abamnyama. In other words, when the colonizers came, they used the Bible to take our land. And many people believe that the Bible actually is there to brainwash people. Well, we say in South Africa, people are entitled to their opinions. Even if they are wrong, they're still entitled to their wrong opinions. I will accept that and say, my understanding is that the reason many people hate the Bible is because many people actually are misled. They believe that the Bible is a Christian book. Let me say that again. Many people believe that the Bible is a Christian book. They believe that the Bible is incwadi yamakrestu. My interacting with the Bible has made me to realize that the Bible is not necessarily for Christians. Well, Christians happen to use it, but it's not necessarily for a Christian book. If you look into the first constitution, which was written in Geneva by guys like John Calvin, the principles that form the first constitution, out of which many constitutions of the world have been written, was written by people who were using the Bible, using the Ten Commandments, basically to write the Constitution. That's why it's wrong in South Africa to commit murder, because in the Bible it says you shall not murder, right? Today it's wrong to commit crime because in the Bible it says you shall not commit crime. You shall not steal. You know, it's amazing that all of these principles are embedded in the Bible, and yet you say we hate the Bible. And I understand, I agree with the listeners why people actually, I agree with the African people why they hate the Bible, because the Bible symbolizes oppression to them. As a matter of fact, the parliaments or the people who were colonialists, when they came to take our land, they used the Bible. Actually, by the way, a parliament before 1994 election, people used to pray in the morning before passing AMA laws that oppress black people of this country. They used to pray before that. So understand people's feelings that they hate the Bible because people were oppressed, and it all was done in the name of the Bible, saying this. The reason I'm also wanting to use the Bible clearly is that the Bible is a manual for life. That, to me, is the truth that is so outstanding. I mean, I've read leadership books. I've always realized that the leadership books that have been written, that we're using in universities, they have their philosophy from the Bible. In other words, they're using biblical principles. It's just that you don't say that. And so for me, the Bible is helpful in that I do not find a book that actually records our history. I told you what they record a history too. That's why I went to the Bible to find out who is an African man. Where are we coming from? Because I tried to read as many books as possible. I wasn't finding clarity until I went to the book of origin, which is the book of Genesis. Then I bumped into the history of African people. That's why it is in that context that we are using the Bible. The Bible, actually, I know it's been abused. Many people have used it for ukungcwaba. Actually, the Bible is a book of life. It's not incwadi yokungcwaba. It's not the book. It's not the book that you use for burying people. It's for life. These are principles that you come across. These are universal principles. You learn universal principles that govern the way you live your life as well. Whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, you can still use the Bible in terms of understanding life and how societies evolve. So today we are going to engage the Bible and look into the Bible, or what I would call the manual, or rather the history textbook. We are going to use it, look into the Bible really as a way of revisiting our history. Now, the first value that I want to outline and underscore is the whole issue of leadership. Leadership. Where do we find that the African people were good in leadership? Now, if you go back to the book of Genesis, which is the book of origin, and read Genesis chapter 10, it says this, starting from verse 8, actually. It says, then Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first to be a mighty man on the earth. The word Cush actually means black. It also means African. It also means Ethiopian. So you realize that Cush basically gave birth to Nimrod, and Nimrod was the first one to be a mighty man on the earth. It's recorded in the Bible. So Cush, being this black guy, gave birth to this guy by the name of Nimrod. And of course, you read the history of Nimrod and stuff like that. It continues to say that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of the land, Nimrod went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh. Right? And then that tells you that right from the book of Genesis, you see the African people building cities. They are contributing towards human development. And again, if you read into the book of Genesis chapter 11, it speaks about the guy by the name of Nimrod who built a tower whose top was to reach the heaven. It actually says that he built a powerful tower with an aim of reaching heaven, such that God himself said in verse 7, come, let us go down and there confound or mix up their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So you understand that God was concerned in heaven. Actually, it says in verse 4 that God said that actually that if we allow these people to continue, there is nothing that will be impossible for them, because these guys are determined. So you see strong leadership qualities in the lives of the African people. One person would say, is that enough to say that African people have always been leaders? I see abantu abamnyama these days, African people seem to be at the tail. Actually, they seem to be the tail. You know, we are always following around what other nations are saying. We are not inventing anything. We are not being creative. We're always looking up to other nations. Now, when I investigate if that's how we've always been, now, for you to understand that, you need to go again to the book of Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18, which is the book immediately after Genesis. You have the book of Exodus. Again, these are the first books of the Bible, and yet you are coming across the black people, or the African people. The reason I'm mentioning this is not to say that African people are better than other people. The reason I'm mentioning is because these things have not been told to us. We have always been misled into believing there is nothing creative that we have ever done. We do not feature in the history of mankind, and all of those lies that have been told about them. Black people. So you realize, or even African people, you realize in reading the book of Exodus, basically looking at chapter 18, starting from verse 13, you can read up to 27, that Moses is trying to be a judge over his people, and Jethro comes to him and actually teaches Moses how to lead properly, you know, and he taught Moses and said to him, you know, in verse 17 it says, Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you are doing is not good. In other words, we see an African man by the name of Jethro teaching Moses how to lead. We call this principle basically the principle of leaving legacy in the leadership. In other words, raising other leaders. He says what you are doing to be starring, to be the celebrity, to be the center of attraction, everybody waiting for Moses to take this decision, is not right. If you want to be powerful, Jethro says, you must appoint leaders under you. He gave him counsel and said, if you continue like this, you will worry yourself. So you understand that we see that the African people taught these Jewish people how to lead correctly. Now you will say, where do you get the information that this father-in-law of Moses was actually a black man? It says in the book of Numbers chapter 12. It says in the book of Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. Now Miriam and Aaron talk against Moses, their brother, because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite woman. Actually, if you investigate this verse, it becomes clear that Moses married an Ethiopian woman. I mean, Moses, the Jewish leader, married an Ethiopian woman. This woman was so black that his brother Aaron and Miriam, Usisga Moses, they started laughing at Moses because he married this black woman. That tells you again that if the woman was from Ethiopia, then it makes sense that if father-in-law Moses' father-in-law was a black man or was an African man again. So you realize that we are in the history because these things were written, many, many years ago. It was long time ago. These things are recorded. They are in our history that we have always been instrumental in areas of leadership. I could talk more and more and more talking about another son of Cush called Egypt, actually, and go back into Genesis chapter 10. However, for the sake of time, I want us to move on. So you realize that although today we are not leaders, but we have been leaders in the past. I'm just reminding you that you have a potential of being a leader as an African person. You don't have to look up to other nations and think that the only thing good you could do is to imitate them. You can lead because your forefathers, our ancestors were leaders. So we are insulting Abo Baba Mkhulu if we start shrinking so that other people may shine. We are denying ourselves an opportunity for growth, and we are denying other nations an opportunity because other nations learn from us a whole lot of things in the past. I want us to look into the second value here that I find to be very interesting. African people, value number 2, always cherished wisdom. In other words, African people were known for wisdom. That sounds like an insult today. If I say Utabanda, about Africa, they've always been known to be people who are wise. Where do I get that from? You have to go to the book of 1 Kings for you to establish that African people have always been wise. You have to go to the book of 1 Kings, the 4th chapter. You will see some powerful principles there. Now, what you learn is that actually, if you read, for sake of time, start from verse 29. It says this, 29 of 1 Kings. It says this, and God gave Solomon exceptionally much wisdom and understanding and breadth of mind, like the sand of the seashore. Solomon's wisdom excelled or exceeded the wisdom of all of the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. By the way, Egypt is not in heaven. Egypt is in Africa. Now, what you notice here is that Solomon's wisdom is compared to the wisdom of the Egyptian. In other words, before Solomon became wise, the Egyptian people were the wisest people on the planet. And when Solomon came, then there's a comparison between Solomon and the wisdom of the people of the East and the people of Egypt. Verse 31 says, for he was wiser than all other men, than Ethan and Ezra and Heman, Calcol, Dada, the sons of Mahol. His fame was all in the nations round about. You continue reading. And then verse 34 says, men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon and from all kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. One principle we're establishing here in the midst of that is that if you want to, in life, it's not always about money, because many people tell you, if njengitholi saga, so long as I have money, I tell you I can do a whole lot of things. Solomon here discovered the secret. He didn't ask for wisdom, for money, neither did he ask for fame, popularity, by starring, by celebrating, which were starring, those are things abantu bafuna isaga, bafuna ukuba starring, bafuna ukuduma, bafuna imali. And Solomon here says, no, I'm not looking for those things. I'm looking for wisdom. Now, we learn another principle here in leadership, because we're involved in leadership training, that if you focus on wisdom, money, which are the resources, and fame will follow you. You don't need to focus on those things, because money is the byproduct of you being wise. So we learn a principle that it's not about money, it's about you finding wisdom, because once you have wisdom, you will be famous. That's not something we're looking for. You will also be able to have money. But then our focus here is the whole issue of the wisdom, that the people of Egypt were wise. Someone would say that's not enough to convince me that they were indeed wise. You have to go back to 1 Kings chapter 10 for you to understand that we are not just thumb-sucking these things. Now, chapter 10 of 1 Kings tell us, verse 1, when the queen of Sheba heard of the wisdom and the fame of Solomon, she came to prove him with hard questions, problems, and riddles. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels bearing spices, very much gold, and precious stones. When she had come to Solomon, she communed with him about all that was in her heart. Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king, which he failed to explain to her. When the queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom and skill in the house he had built, verse 6 says, she said to the king, it was a true report I had in my own land of you acts and sayings and wisdom. I did not believe it until I came. That's exactly what I focus on. Now, how do we know that the queen of Sheba was from Africa? You have to go to the book of Genesis, because one of the relatives, or the son of Cush, the name of the son of Cush was Sheba, and this was the queen of Sheba. A second reason why we say this woman was from Africa as well is because she was carrying spices, gold, and precious stones. And all of the things that are mentioned here that she was carrying are the resources that you only get particularly in the African continent. By the way, the richest estate or piece of estate in the whole world, or yes, the richest real estate in the whole world is Africa. If you want to find the place that is richest, in other words, we are the most richest continent in the whole world. It looks like African people are the only ones who do not understand that we are the richest. In other words, if you want to find gold, you find gold, diamonds, precious stones, perfume, spices, all of these things you find in Africa, and yet we are the most poorest country. What a contradiction, what a paradox. I don't know how to explain that. As a matter of fact, we have so much gold that if we are to start focusing on the management of our resources, other nations will be looking at us and start trading with other nations again. These things are very, very clear as we continue to read in this history textbook that we are using today, or you call it the Jewish history, or you call this part that we're investigating the Bible, whichever way you view it. But anyway, we are getting to understand that these things are documented facts that have been written about where African society is coming from. Again, to support the issue of wisdom, again, I would want us to go to the book of Acts, or chapter 7. Acts chapter 7, verse 22. It actually says in the book of Acts chapter 7, verse 22, which is in the New Testament, it says that Moses learned all the wisdom of the Egyptians, or Moses was educated in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians. He became mighty in words and in deeds. Now, many people are fascinated. We are all fascinated by the leadership of Moses. Moses was taught leadership, by the way, we see very clearly, by Jethro. Some of the principles of leadership and management were introduced by Jethro, who happened to be a Cushite. Again, we go into the New Testament, we are told that Moses learned, in other words, he went to the university. I want to believe that actually Moses went to the University of Alexander. That's where he started, because that was the first university in the whole world, was in Egypt. It's called the University of Alexander. The first university in the whole world is found in Africa. Now, you realize that basically in the past, we were not so foolish. We were not so backward. Moses had to come to Africa to learn leadership. It's documented in the book of Acts chapter 7, verse 22. Now, you ask yourself a question. If Moses was taught the wisdom of the Egyptian, and he learned, of course, to write in Egypt, because we also, by the way, introduced the writing called hieroglyphic writing. That was the writing we introduced. That was our contribution. That was our forefathers' contribution to the nations of the world. We introduced writing. Sizwe, ukubhala. It was called hieroglyphics. Again, these are documented facts. So you realize that we taught Moses to lead. We also taught him wisdom, because though that was our game, that's the game we used to play. Now, I want to highlight another principle, which is the principle of Ubuntu, the issue of Ubuntu. It's not only based on the past. Ubuntu is a value that we can still talk about today. Ubuntu, the issue of Ubuntu, the issue of Ubuntu. What do I mean by that? It is actually said, we have saying like in Africa that says umuntu, ngabantu. We are talking about that human consciousness, that connectedness to society as a whole, the communal lifestyle where you are not living independently of others. There's a quote actually I want to basically read here. It says, 100 times every day I remind myself that my inner and outer life depend on the labors of other men, living and dead, and that I must exert myself in order to give in the same measure as I have received and am still receiving. So you realize that if you have learned so much from others, you are supposed to give in the same contribution as well. You have to do something that will reflect the commitment that has been made by other people. You know, as I'm talking, it's around June 16. We are talking about the commitment that was made by some of the young people in the past, you know, to bring South Africa to where we are today. We need to remember the sacrifices they made and learn from them and apply ourselves to create a better future, because they work hard to create the future that we have today. So we owe our society, we owe our future children to create a better future. So my question is, what contribution are you making to society right now? Iliphi iqhaza olibambile emphakathini njengamanje ukushape impilo engcono for ama generation azayo, because we have always lived interdependently with others. The issue of Ubuntu basically clearly says, if you read the book of Exodus chapter 12, from verse 35 to 36, you learn that when the Jewish people were oppressed or suffered under our leadership back in Egypt under Pharaoh, as we oppressed them, the day they left basically, we gave them money, we gave them gold, silver, and clothes. Actually, in the book of Psalm, it says that the clothes that they were wearing, they were wearing quality clothes basically, because they were wearing those clothes for years, for 40 years actually. You know, I always say, well, that clearly tells you that we gave them quality clothing. You know, that's why they were able to wear those clothes for so many years. Well, you may dispute that. But the interesting thing is that when people were serving us as slaves, Amajuta, they used to be slaves under us. Actually, Amajuta have not forgotten that. That's why they have a holiday that the Jews celebrate. It's called the Passover, the Passover. It's when they remember Exodus, movement from Egyptian oppression. They were used to work for us. In other words, Amajuta used to be our slave. Today, they are the richest nation in the planet, you know, in terms of possessing our resources. They you know, those guys are stinkingly rich, and yet they used to suffer under us. They worked for us. And we're people of Ubuntu because the day they left, we gave them silver, we gave them gold, we gave them clothes. That's very, very interesting. That we're not greedy. You know, we're so generous. Those are some of the things that are our values that we cherish so much about being Africans. Those are things we are celebrating today when we say it feels good indeed to be an African. Those are values that we want to focus on. If the whole value of Ubuntu, it's very, very important. How do we underline this? We also link the question of Ubuntu with generosity. You can read the book of Genesis chapter 12, verse 10. Genesis chapter 12, verse 10. You see Abraham going down to Egypt because he was hungry. The Bible clearly says that he was hungry. And yet when you read the following chapter, which is Genesis chapter 13, from verse 1 to 2, the Bible says that Abraham came out of Egypt as a rich man. So it tells you that we were so generous. Ubuntu, Abraham, we gave him gold, we gave him livestock, and Abraham became rich. We made Abraham rich in a sense. What I'm trying to say by that, I'm not just bragging. I'm just saying that we contributed to other nations because we're not so greedy. I'm seeing the opposite these days. In today's society, actually, if a white guy and a black guy, as we say that there are people that are black, you know, they're actually brown or dark, you know, and others, we call them white, they're actually pink, you know. Let's say they're coming from Mozambique. Both of them are not carrying passports, Both of them, they are illegal in South Africa. One of those people, we call it kwere kwere. One of them, we call it tourist. I always ask a question when we have interaction with young people. Which of those guys is kwere kwere? I'm told, well, if a guy is black and he doesn't have a passport, he is kwere kwere. If a guy is white, he doesn't have a passport, he doesn't have an ID, he doesn't have legal citizenship. In South Africa, we call him a tourist. You know, we tell you that we are struggling with self-hatred. We hate people that are black. We hate people that are Africans. We are struggling with the problem of self-hatred. This problem of self-hatred extends beyond color because you find people talking badly about African leadership because we don't believe that Africans can lead. We always undermine each other because we don't believe that there's anything good that can come out of Africa. Most of us, even in our choice of music, we don't believe that music is good. People take it even further when it comes to sport. There are people who know everything about overseas teams, whether in cricket, whether in rugby, in soccer, and yet they know nothing about the South African teams because they don't believe that South Africans have anything to offer. They don't believe that Africans have anything to offer. The amazing thing is that people who are playing for those teams that are outside South Africa, I'm talking about the teams, soccer teams that are overseas, those people are coming from Africa. If you check, you see a lot of soccer stars from Africa, and yet we've got the greatest respect for people from outside because we are struggling with self-hatred. We don't believe there's anything good that can come out of our continent. Those are the issues we want to nail down. Those are issues we are addressing. How come we hate ourselves? We have been told that because we are black, we are cursed. Actually, the way churches that used to preach, they still preach. Some people still believe that if you are black, you are cursed. That's why people will tell you that if you want to be successful, you must submit under a white man because the white man has the anointing. People believe that if you are white, then you've got the anointing. Actually, people will even prefer to have white people laying hands on them because they believe that those guys are blessed. You know, and by that, whether those people are basically Africans, white South Africans or not, people are struggling. They think that if you are white, you have got the anointing. People are comfortable with the white people because they believe that black people are cursed. You know, those are things we're underlining. We are not promoting racial preference. We are saying let all races be equal. There mustn't be any inferior race because before God, there is no race that is inferior than another race. I want us to focus on another value here again, which is the whole question of civilization as a close. Civilization. I mean, it's very important that we highlight this thing of civilization. If you read in your Bible, in the book of Genesis chapter 42, from verse 1 to 2, you actually see a situation where the sons of Jacob, the sons of Israel, are going down to Egypt to buy food. I mean, how many years ago was that? I mean, thousands of years back in the times of Abraham, you see people going down to Africa to buy food. And they actually brought money, which tells you that we had a system of trade in place then in Africa. Back in that time, you see the sons of Jacob, Simon, all of these guys, Reuben, going down there, you know, to buy food because we already had principles of trade in place, which speaks of civilization. We have been civilized before Jan van Riebeeck came to Cape Town. We have been civilized. In Genesis chapter 43 from verse 1 to 2 again, it's underscoring the same principle that there is trade involved. If you read in the book of Exodus, you realize that Moses was educated in Egypt. You continue reading, you realize that already in Egypt we had midwives. In other words, we had the hospital system. Moses. What does it tell you? We have been civilized. It's just that we have been deceived, bamboozled into believing ukuthi thina we are worth nothing, we know nothing, therefore we must always submit to other nations because we know nothing. These are the things that we are nailing today and saying these things are not true about African society. Much has been said, negative things have been said about South African people, and yet I want to tell you that even our national anthem, one of the best, actually the national anthem was voted the best national anthem in the world, I think around 94 or 95, around there. That song was written by a young man by the name of Enoch Sotonga. He wrote a song, and actually at the age of 32, he passed away. The song, which is national anthem. What an anthem. It's one of the best national anthem. I'm so passionate. I'm so proud to be associated with South Africa and Africa as a whole because it feels so good to be an African. Now, on the issue of civilization, I just want to move and touch on the issue of cultures, because many people, when they talk like this, they start saying, hey, thank you so much for helping us. Now it means, it means I'll have to marry 3 women or 4, because that's how we live as African people. In 2005, I don't think there's a normal person who can think like that. I mean, really, it's a very dangerous way of thinking, because we are not saying that all of the African cultures are good. There are some of the cultures that are bad. Now, we say, who are you to tell us that this culture is bad? I will say it's not me that is saying that. HIV/AIDS is telling us, probably, that that's not the safest route. Amongst other things, our constitution tells us it's not right. Our constitution clearly says that we are all equals in the eyes of the law. And the constitution of South Africa is above your culture, your Zulu culture. Therefore, Umthetho-Sisekelo of South Africa, uthi, we are all equal. Women and men are equal. What does that say? If a man takes 2 wives, a woman is allowed to have 2 men. If a man has 3 girlfriends outside marriage, a woman is allowed to have 3 girlfriends outside marriage. That's the story. That's the way it is. You can't change that, because we are all equal. If when uthatha isithembu, inkosikazi akavumele ukuthi nilala ama-shift ekhaya, naye aphume aye ngaphandle ayothola amanye amadoda, nawe futhi indoda uhambe uthola amanye amakhosikazi. What would that result into? Those are questions that we're asking ourselves and saying, hey, let us wake up. Let's catch up, a wake-up call as African people. Just on that point, I always struggle with some of the people in my province actually saying they don't want umuntu wesifazane ofaka amacici, umuntu wesifazane ongathwele ekhanda, and they've got funny stories, and I don't know, get involved. The amazing thing is that uthola abantu athi yena akamfuna unkosikazi ofaka amacici, akamfuna unkosikazi ogqoka amabhuluku, kodwa yena unentombi egqoka amabhuluku, unentombi efaka amacici, unentombi engathwali ekhanda. And you ask yourself a question, where are we going as an African society? Because we are saying, well, asifuni lezi zinto lezi, and yet bajola, amadoda amadala ajola. These are dangerous behaviors that we are saying, hey, if we are not careful, kuphelile ngale sizwe, ikakhulukazi la KwaZulu Natal, elikamthani lisenkingeni, if we don't focus on this thing. We are talking about the values here. We are saying the constitution is above cultural practices in certain situations. Well, people may debate that. Whatever they say, we are all equals in the eyes of the law. We are also equals in the eyes of God, which means if indoda has a right to marry 2 women, allow a woman as well to have 2 men as well outside marriage. That's my view, and that's where I'm looking at it. And I think it's just fair if we are serious about building esteem on this facade. If you are serious about promoting the rights of women, as our president is committed. It's a very touchy issue, I know. Let's take a step further. Many people believe that all of the cultures of the African people are bad. I want to challenge that and say, that's not true. All cultures are bad and all cultures are good. What do I mean by that? There are good things in the Zulu culture. There are bad things in the Zulu culture. There are good things in the English culture. There are bad things in the English culture. For instance, let me just paint a picture here as I move towards the end, just before I close. You will notice that when the missionaries came in South Africa, actually they were bringing the Bible for the second time. Actually, the African people, particularly in Ethiopia and Egypt, they received the Bible before the people of Europe did. It's a well-documented fact. The Bible reached Africa before it reached European countries. In other words, we even sent Abantu to go to Europe from Egypt. One of them was called Felix. You know, these people went there, taking the Bible with them. They were killed. I remember there were some who died in Switzerland, actually. Now, you realize, that we have always been involved. It's just that we lost some of the things. So when the Bible came for the second time to us, for instance, it was tainted with the European culture. Somebody painted a picture and said, it's like ukudla isemish. Isemish uyidle ne plastic yakhona. Isemish is good. But the challenge is that the plastic is not good for your stomach. So right now, plastic, we are leaving the sandwich. We are saying, do away with the European cultures, but continue embracing the Bible. We will use the Bible in Imbizo Zetu, in building Imbizo. We'll continue to use the Bible. However, we say no to the cultures are imposed upon us. Let me quote one example. When the English people came, ama missionaries that come to England, particularly, in London, I just came, from Switzerland. I realized the nations of Europe, it's very, very cold. I mean, it's cold even in summer. So because it's cold, they used to come to Africa wearing ama bunch, ama coats, and a bow tie. And if you go to see, I mean, like, you'll be surprised that the people wear coats and they actually bagqoka coat, but maybe suit, but maybe tie because it's cold. Now, when they came preaching, they put my Bible. Tina sakopeli culture yabo ukugqoka, and they actually condemned ukugqoka kwethu, and we thought it was wrong. As a result of that, up until today, there are people who are bound. They believe ukuthi once waphatha iBhayibheli fanele ugqoke ibhantshi no tie. Let me say this about ibhantshi no tie. Ibhantshi no tie is a good English culture. Let me say that again. Ibhantshi no tie is not biblical. It's not in the Bible. Ukugqoka ibhantshi no tie ukuhlonipha isiko labelungu. And it's very good. I'm not questioning that. I don't, ukugqoka ibhantshi no tie akuhlanganisela utho noNkulunkulu. Ukuhlonipha isiko labelungu, and mawuthi uyalithanda isiko labelungu ayikho into wrong ngaleyo ngoba it's considered actually to be a formal culture. So gqoka ibhantshi no tie, but ibhantshi no tie akuyona. In other words, you can't use that to say ukuthi uhloniphekile noma ukhonza uNkulunkulu because gqoka ibhantshi no tie. It has got nothing to do with God. Ngibe disappointed when I see young people around January. I mean, that's just my personal feeling. Around January, ilanga libalele uthole a young man ayibophe ngotie wafaka ibhantshi on a Sunday morning. Uthi ambuza uthi why athi yena ukuthi ngenkonzweni. People don't understand that even the word church, igama elithi ibandla, is the word that means imbizo, more translated into Zulu. Ngiyembizweni, therefore fanele ngigqoke ibhantshi. You know what I mean? So basically, the mistake we are making is to impose a culture yokugqoka yabelungu. Uzusho ukuthi akufanele umuntu esifazane gqoka nje owesisa gqoka kanje zonke lento oyibalayo amasiko abelungu ukugqoka sipromote isiko above intando kaNkulunkulu. So by so doing, basically we are robbing people of an opportunity. Why am I talking so strongly? Is because I met young people abathi mina I've heard the truth, I want to change, but I can't go to church because anginazi ingubo ezinhle, because people who go to church basically bagqoka ngathi ama Christmas tree ngathi baya kwi-show indawo okudliwa kuyona inqephu isonto kuyodliselwa lapho. So mongenazi ingubo awuye esontweni. Angibasoli nabantu abasha ngokuya emasontweni abanazo vele ingubo ezinhle, because it's not like isonto lokuthengela ingubo ezinhle. You have to ukuthi uyithengele wena ingubo ezinhle. So I just want to highlight that and say, if people want to do that, practice isiko labelungu, qhubeka ul-enjoy isiko labelungu, but ungalihlanganisi neBhayibheli. That's what I'm against, because in the Bible it doesn't say ukuthi ngqoka amabhantshi. Ukugqoka amabhantshi into inventwe abelungu. It has got nothing to do with God. These are things we want to highlight and emphasize very, very, very strongly. Why are we so passionate? We are realizing that many people are robbed because they believe that my culture is inferior to another culture. Ayikho iculture engcono kuneyomunye. All cultures are the same. There are good things and bad things going on cultures. And I want to say, bagwethu asivuselele, let us revive the value of Ubuntu, the value of hard work ethic. Some of the things that I've noticed, actually, I highlighted the issue here, wisdom and hlakanipha. There's one thing that is disturbing these days, about a culture that seems to be developing in South Africa. Because people don't love the continent of Africa, because people hate being Africans, it even shows in their work ethic. Abantu abasena lugqozi lokusebenza. Kunomoya obuvila that is developing. I just came back from Switzerland, and this is one thing I realized. In Switzerland, imigaqo yakhona, those roads are spotless clean. Ama streets akhona. And guess who's cleaning them? By the way, we don't have many black people who are serving there as iqila. Therefore, I found the white people cleaning the streets. That's very interesting. I didn't know the white people could clean the street. Just for the first time, actually, I saw it. And this is very interesting. The white people are cleaning the streets. I wanted to ask a question. How come they clean them so well? I realized they love their country. They talk about it's good to be a Swiss, to be a Swiss. Because they are proud of being Swiss. By the time they Switzerland, they transport that culture. I come across, particularly as work with people in companies, culture in other words, people are saying umshini womlungu. Because of that, that's a barrier. In other words, they don't want to commit themselves because I'm working here from Lu. So long as you don't take ownership of your job, you don't believe that you are contributing towards a better tomorrow of your children's children and the nations of Africa. Even your attitude towards work, uhlale upushwa njalo, because you don't take ownership. Because awulthandi vele izwe lakini, and it's reflected. There's no ownership because people don't love being African. People base Switzerland, the reason imigaqo is clean is because bayathanda ukuba abantu base Switzerland, and futhi bayazithanda ba proud. Unless we restore pride, sibuyisele ukuziqhenya ngokuba umAfrika imigwaqo yakithi izoqhubeka ingcole sizoba nenkinga kwi-work ethic ngoba bazoba ama-villain because they can't work for the country that is not theirs. Basically, there is no sense of ownership because this thing is not yours. I also realized that the illiteracy rate in KwaZulu-Natal is standing at 65%. And yet we are the people who introduced hieroglyphic writing. 65%, that's very, very disturbing. There was one thing that disturbs me, there was a white guy who said, if you are a black woman and you want to hide money from your husband, put it in the book. I don't know, how true is that? In other words, umuntu omnyama imali, provided a black, ifake encwadini because angeke ayithole. What does it say? We hate even reading because we don't believe in the culture of learning, and these are things. We introduce writing and yet we don't read. And because of that, we are so limited. I could go on and talk about the respect for marriage that used to be part of African society, that we used to respect marriage. That's why umuntu did not sleep with umuntu outside marriage. You can't sleep with a person that you are not married to. According to the Zulu culture, according to the African culture, it is illegal to sleep with a person that you are not married to. That's how it was in Africa. And if we want to be safe in today's world, we need to go back and say, hey, young people, hloniphani ilife. Hlonipha ilife ukuze insuku zakho zande ezweni. Hlonipha umshado mawuhlonishwe abantu bonke. These are values that we want to see coming back to our society again. It feels good to be an African. And I could go on, go to the book of Acts chapter 8 and show you ukuthi basically the people of Ethiopia had access to the Bible. They were reading the book of Isaiah long before Jan van Riebeeck came to Cape Town. I could go on and show you ukuthi the person who carried the cross of Jesus was a man from Africa, a country that's under Egypt, just under Egypt, in a country called Quran. I could show you that from the book of Acts chapter 13, the people who prayed for Paul when he went to minister was a guy from Nigeria, a guy from just around Egypt. There were 3 African people laying hands upon Paul. So we have always been involved in the shaping of history. Arise, Africa. It is your time as well with all of the nations of the world. It's not only for Africa. Let's arise and be equal with other nations and make a contribution. Batopili, once again, umuntu ngabantu. Let us work hard in restoring the values of Africa. It feels good indeed to be an African. I want to end this teaching with the words of Nelson Mandela during the inauguration back in 1994, which is a very historical season indeed. As we look back, we realize what achievements we've made. I think that brings a sense of joy, actually, as we celebrate that, because many a times we get to think, actually, of the resilience, the tenacity, the pain, the frustration, the sacrifices that we have been through in order for us to come to where we are today as a nation. It's been a journey. It's been attended by sorrows, frustration, pain. People have laid down their lives for us to be living in this South Africa we call new. This is what he had to say. Our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people will not feel insecure around you. We are born to manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not in some of us. It is in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. What a powerful speech. What a powerful thought that we are here to manifest the glory of God. And that glory is not manifested because many a times we like playing small. We ask questions. Can anything good come from Africa? You know, we are faced with unemployment. We are faced with crime and all of the challenges, HIV, AIDS, is there a better tomorrow? Can the African dream work? I want to challenge you today and say what we are talking about today is the direction we've taken. Somebody said, the most important thing in life is not where you are, but in which direction you are going. From a place where we are, if we lift up our eyes beyond the chaos, we lift up our gaze beyond the frustration, the pain, the unemployment, illiteracy, there is a brighter future emerging for all of us in Africa. Let us arise together and rebuild a unique and peculiar South Africa, which all of us can be proud of as we have started, particularly as a rainbow country here in South Africa. Let's stop hating ourselves and always looking up to other nations, not wanting to do things for ourselves, thinking other people have got solutions for us. Let us arise together, and other people will automatically join us as we continue in this struggle. Let us lift up our eyes. We do have the glory of God within us, and God wants to fight and help us come out of a life of misery that has been inflicted upon us. I would close by saying it indeed feels good to be an African, and I am proud to be an African.